You are now listening to You Heard. In today's episode of You Heard, we are joined by Catalina, the founder of Reciprocate, which focuses on finding home within yourself and unpacking that. We're going to be talking about what it means to have a conscious connection and observation with yourself, what it means to engage in our senses, and how we should be slowing down to engage with our present self. On today's episode of You Heard, we are joined by Catalina Capri, who I have known for a decade, over a decade at this point, which is so crazy to think about. And I'm so happy that, you know, she was able to find me and reached out, and we have been able to reconnect and bring our calling and the things we are doing now in our lives together through this podcast and through the work that she is doing. So Catalina is a multiracial healing artist and founder of Reciprocate, which is a multilingual digital studio that centers healing through creative expression and collective care. Originally from Queens, New York, but now based in Brussels, Belgium. Catalina, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really looking forward to just really talking about all of the amazing things that brought you to Reciprocate, but also that you're doing through Reciprocate, so our audience can really dive into all of the amazing like healing work and light work that you're doing through your own calling.
Hello, welcome. Well, not welcome. Thank you for having me. Welcome everyone who's listening.
Yes.
It's so funny because I'm so used to now, like when people come into my space, I'm like, marhaba, marhaba, like, welcome, I'm so happy you're here. So I guess that just came out. So marhaba everyone who is listening.
Yeah, no, definitely welcome, because this is a space. It may be a listening space and not a physical space, but definitely welcome. So I appreciate your warmth in that.
Reciprocate and healing art, it's actually been really beautiful how Reciprocate as a business came out of people asking me like, hey, Kat, you know, you've given me the, you know, energy work or things in the past, like, can we do sessions? And it was interesting, but I always considered it something personal that was just really applicable where I was at. People close to me, my friends were asking me for sessions, and then remember they Venmo'd me after saying like, thanks so much for the healing art session. And I'm like, wow, like this is really interesting, and this is what the community, like my community, is asking for. Mm-hmm. So that's how it kind of just, and it really is exciting to me because I was able to, or through this work, put together everything that I'm passionate about. So it's therapeutic and counseling. I was able to see that I began social work in Palestine, continued in Bushwick after Brooklyn. Mm-hmm. And when I was working as social work, I recognized that a lot of people that I was working were not native English speakers, so majority of the work was either in Arabic or Spanish. I recognized that they didn't have the language to verbalize what they needed, but I saw with their body, I saw the way they were expressing themselves, that they find alternate ways to talk about what they were needing, and the services just weren't always meeting them there. And so I started to think, I'm like, how can I become a better social worker? You know, like, because sometimes I recognized that they would say these things that were so interesting, and they were like, I don't know, like, I want more. I don't know how to explain it. So then that's how I found social design, where co-creating with communities to address social injustices and also use the creative process. I'm like, what? Like, that is so cool. So yeah, that's how it really just like led me there and coming together. So Reciprocate's really the healing art. So using creative process, increase self-love, and then also working through like, what does finding home within yourself mean, and how can we really unpack that so that it's sustainable and accessible for you?
Yeah, that's so powerful that you have been able to go through that journey yourself and be able to find ways to use that experience in your own respective journey to, again, kind of like give light and shed light for other people to embark on that journey themselves, and kind of like what you said, you know, find home within themselves and be able to create a space that allows people to express themselves. And I think there are a lot of similarities to, you know, how Reciprocate started with with how You Heard started. For me, I've been on, this spiritual journey, being able to further connect with myself, definitely looked in the, ancient spiritual works and the ancestral work, and have kind of looked into all different kinds of ways in which I can further connect with myself and the space around me and people and nature. And as you know, because that's pretty much how we met each other, I love to talk. I love to present. I love connecting with people. I'm the kind of person who wants to be up on stage and navigate a room. And that's always kind of been a talent and passion of mine. Like, I enjoy doing those kinds of things, and in trying to figure out how I could further use this journey that I'm on, and fuse that with this, this talent and this passion that I have to be able to speak and to use my ability to speak and to connect with people on a larger scale. It was, okay, let's create this podcast. And what is this podcast going to look like? And for me in particular, I found a lot of my personal healing through just conversation that I've had with my loved ones, and just trying to rationalize and further understand myself, or further understand their respective situation if they were coming to me to kind of guide them or give them a piece of advice, or just have a moment of healing, or someone to listen to them. And then being able to create a platform for people to do that, to tell their story, and to really be able to create a community out of it, not necessarily a following, and being able to have this community that you're all able to really look to each other and find a piece of yourself in each person's story, whether it's a story about being a single mom, or a story about starting your own business, or a story about growing up as a first generation student. Everybody kind of has a different way and approach of how they lived, and there's something that's in there that the audience can always pull from, and spark something in themselves that causes that self-reflection that often needs to be had in order to start that journey of finding home within yourself, having healing, finding better ways to express yourself, either to yourself or to others. So I think it's amazing that after all these years of knowing each other, from, our pretty much our freshman year in high school to now, that we found a way for us to really just use the energy that we've always had to create communities for them to further love and embrace themselves and the people that are around them.
I also wanted to add, not only is this amazing that you're doing this, but you're also really good at it. So I'm really, I just always, even in high school, I'm always really proud of how you articulated yourself and always advocated for your community. Like, I really appreciate that, because with, the overlaps that we had in New York, it was just really beautiful to see that. So I wanted to make sure I had that as well, because it's true.
Yeah, thank you. And I mean, same for you. Like I was mentioning in our conversations prior to actually recording, you've been in so many different cultures, and you've been a little bit of everywhere, and they're all starkly different. We're talking about Bushwick, we're talking about Morocco, we're talking about Palestine, we're talking about Brussels. Like, they're all very different worlds with very different approaches. And even, you being multiracial, as myself, you're Colombian and Italian, I'm Italian, Puerto Rican, Dominican. Like, we're constantly navigating all these different kinds of worlds. But in your respective experience, your ability and courageousness to do that just puts you in a place to really be able to serve on a larger scale, because you're able to understand as I mentioned, so many different spirits and energies that, for at least for myself, I definitely haven't been that exposed to the world, and to be able to find a place of home and comfort within myself to better navigate places that I'm so unfamiliar with. And you have always been out there. I mean, as I said before we started recording, it's like I didn't even know where you were. And the last time I heard about you was probably 3 or 4 years ago, and you were going to get your FMA. And, you've always been that person who's kind of been everywhere and just doing everything. So when you finally reached out to me, I was kind of like, wow, now I get to know where she is now, and what her next venture is, and what we're going to be doing. So I think that because you're such a global person, and that you're able, whatever work that you did in order to have a strong foundation and center for yourself has allowed you to help other people find home within themselves, regardless of, some of the cultural conflicts that can happen, and that multiculturalism that causes tension sometimes because things become so foreign and can create that sense of uncomfortability.
Thank you. It's interesting that you say this because I think it relates to what I'm thinking because during my MFA, I decided to do my thesis with my thesis partner about working with businesses to support working parents. And we recognize throughout the process that a lot of businesses are not met to meet the needs of working parents. And so
absolutely,
it's interesting because I grew up, I'm very grateful, going to great schools, having great education, but always learning that like the end goal is to be independent, to work, to travel, and all these things. And of course, those are great messaging. But so it really encouraged me, I'm so grateful. I've traveled to over 40 countries. So I really have been able to get the sense of independence. But at the same time, I wasn't recognizing how important it was to me energetically to have a family and to grow. I wasn't taught outside of the home, like to be equally important. Right. And so throughout this thesis process, I'm like, you know what? Like, it's more important to me to be a parent than to be working. It was interesting. That was where I am trying to support working parents. And I'm recognizing how it kind of gave me this whole mind shift about how, to be a parent and to have a family. So I'm working through this. And then I had the opportunity to present something as part of my master's program in Paris. And so I went for a weekend to present. And my friend, she was like, come through. It's only an hour by train. Like, you're used to taking an hour and a half train from Queens to Manhattan. Like, it's no big deal.
That's how I got to school.
Right, exactly. So I'm like, yeah, no problem. Like, it's so close. I lived in Palestine with her. She was my roommate. So we felt super comfortable navigating new spaces. So she's like, yeah, just come through. We'll go around the city. I'm like, all right. So I'm here literally for 24 hours. We go to this she's like, oh, there's a Colombian cafe. You're going to love it. We go. I meet who's now my husband. And 6 months later, I move here. I mention this is because throughout the process, I recognized that my energy was always leading me to love, right? And to really growing in that and to supporting myself and those around me to really unpack, like, what does love mean? And like really like how to embody that. And so I was working, I was studying, I was on this path to, like really succeed in this career. And then I recognized, I'm like, actually, if I want to really embody what my heart wants and live through that, like I need to move to Belgium. And that's what happened. And so I remember like meeting this guy and being like, telling my friend like as a joke, I'm like, is this weird that I feel like he's going to be my husband? She's like, you are crazy. You've never said anything like that. And I like flew back to New York and like literally hours later kept in touch. And then, now it's been 2 years, but it's just interesting how, and I'm mentioning this because I think that it's really important to recognize like what our body, what our senses are telling us. Like from the moment that I got to Belgium, something in me, like I recognized my body was calm. I felt like I belonged here. And that's something that I find really important in Reciprocate. Like I'm not telling people they need to move across the world. But like really understanding. And for me, what I've recognized, like when you mentioned communication, for me, it's that in the sense of redefining language so that it becomes accessible. So like, for example, like with defining healing, like, okay, so healing might seem super intimidating if you're not in that space. You might think of overcoming cancer or something very big. And then when you think about it as increased self-love, then you're like, oh, like maybe that's more tangible and we could take personalized steps there. It's a journey. And then for me, when I was like finding home within myself, yourself, ourselves, and broke down each of the letters, your roots, your access, your unique perspective. And then offering you new ways of uncovering and embodying like how you actually want to feel. And then M, like meeting you exactly where you're at. This is your voice, your intentions, your values. And then E, like encouraging you to express yourself emotionally, spiritually, and physically through reciprocate. It's really understanding like what do each of these things mean through different artistic forms. A lot of people come to me, they're like, well, I'm not artistic. And I'm like, well,
Yes.
let's look into what art means for you. Because if you grew up in a space where art was only illustration, and maybe you're not a Michelangelo or something like that,
Right.
then you feel like, oh, I'm not an artist. But I'm like, do you enjoy to cook? What do you enjoy? Like, what stimulates you? And then I'm like, actually, you're so creative and you're so artistic. And I think part of this work, which has been so life-giving for me, is to work with, and this is like the co-creation part, to understand that it's like you have everything within you. It's just recognizing what obstacles, what barriers, what voices have been limiting you from actualizing in a way that you want. And so, yeah, and I think that through this podcast, that's a way to do that, right? Like people sharing their stories, be able to talk and really like realize like, oh my goodness, like all these things actually in my life have been for a purpose, like even if I haven't recognized that.
Yeah, Kat, that's so powerful that you said all of that. And I love, because in doing this work, I always find that I guess worry, or I take on the burden of those who are listening, like, is what we're talking about tangible enough for them? Each of the episode that everybody in the audience who is listening is able to get and to grow from. And the reason why I usually ask this of myself and kind of create this, I guess, stress about the message that are being delivered is like working within like my main community, like the friends that I have that I know that listen, or even my mom that I know that listen to the episodes every week. And kind of just hearing the way that they continue to engage with themselves and go on that journey of self-love and healing, or making certain decisions that, may be less toxic for them and more beneficial for them, and creating that home for themselves. And the importance of having words and a route that is tangible and personalized. I like that you said that it's personal. Like this is something for you, and creativity isn't just illustration or dancing or singing. Like it's what is creativity to you? What is being artistic mean to you? Like it is individualized. And I sometimes, like when I'll get guests on, they'll be like, oh, well, what topic hasn't been done yet? And I always let them know, like, I'm totally okay with a topic being repeated, because no one lives the same life. Like there isn't going to be anything that you say about your journey to whatever you're going to be talking about, or whatever knowledge you're going to be sharing, that is going to be the same as somebody else that I recorded with. I've now had, like, for example, I've had about 4 or 5 different single mothers who have come on and did recordings, and their stories were so different. And I'm like, I'm totally okay telling the single mother story over and over again, because in each time that I've done it, I've had such an overwhelming response to how amazing the episode was, but also that mother themselves had such an overwhelming response of them sharing their story, and being able to see this whole other side of them that they haven't even seen in themselves, and have been able to kind of create this whole process of healing. So whether it's, telling your story over and over again, or finding a way to be inspired to harness this energy that you have for yourself. Like we're all born with this sense of love for ourselves. It's just a matter of how do we use that energy towards ourselves. I think more often we're always kind of taught in society to exhaust ourselves for others, whether it be for work or for our loved ones. We always kind of have to sacrifice ourselves. And we're never really taught to reciprocate that energy back. I love that your business is called Reciprocate, because I feel like that's something that's so important in the world, and people forget that things need to be reciprocated. Like everything about the universe and the world and our spirit and nature is balance. And you can give all you want, but if there is no energy being reciprocated, or there's no space that you're taking to rest and replenish, then you're just going to continue just being this like empty vessel that is exhausted and is seeking for a sense of vitality. And I just love that you spoke about the importance of it being personal, but also for it being tangible, because I think like the words of like healing and boundaries and self-love, for a lot of people who didn't grow up thinking about those kinds of things, or
Right.
even using those words up until recently, because it's all over social media now, it's kind of like, it's cheesy, it's tacky,
Right.
it's like, oh, like you can do that because you're all like this, that, and the third, and I don't know how to do that, or it comes easier for you. Like I get told that a lot, like, oh, Natalia, you loving yourself comes easier for you. And I'm like, that's the furthest thing from true. And it's just, I talk a lot of shit. Like I'm constantly talking, I'm constantly put myself out there. So, I'm willing to share my story and my journey, so it looks like it's easier for me to love myself. But I share just as much as my wins as my losses. And I struggle to embrace myself in all aspects, whether it be good or bad, but it doesn't mean that it's easier for me to love myself more than it is for you. Everybody's journey is different. So that sense of tangibility, and kind of, like you said, like in their own language, like finding the right words. If healing or boundaries or spirituality aren't the words that necessarily connect with you, find the ones that do, that bring you to that sense of you being able to fully live and love yourself.
Yeah, and I think you worded that really beautifully, because I think for me this goes into the area of accessibility, right? So accessibility, like in Reciprocate, is like in the price and the model, but also in how you feel, and how like it has to feel relatable. Because if we're spending time talking about manifestation, boundary setting, and it doesn't feel delicious or appetizing to you, then it's not going to feel real, right? So a lot of times it's honestly like beginning. It's like, okay, let's slow down, right? Like let's take a moment, let's breathe together. And like, let's figure out exactly in this present moment. And something that I really recommend to everyone is scanning your body. If you can do it once a day, like even if you're in the shower, wherever you are, like just taking a moment and just scanning, like, how do my eyes feel? Like, what images am I fixated on? And working all the way down or up, it really helps us to make sense of, okay, like where am I really at right now? And what do I need? But I think a lot of times, as you mentioned before, it's like, let's go, let's go, let's go. Especially that was something in New York for me, where when you moved to Brussels, where it's like Brussels, if you work more than 35 hours or more than 40, excuse me, like that's illegal. And there's so many
I'm
things.
moving.
Right. There's a lot of things where like community, eating from the farms local is just very slow living. And in the beginning, it was really hard for me, because I'm like, what do you mean? Like everyone's getting home at 5 and they're just chilling, like it was tough. And then it made me realize how important that was for my body and for me to understand like exactly what I needed. And that's why like I really recommend for people who are, because again, I'm not saying like, oh, move to Brussels, but in these pockets of busyness and like you feel like you have to be super productive, is like listening, is that actually what your body wants? And that's where this embodiment comes in, where it's like, yeah, maybe, you think that's better for you. Who said that to you? And, it's funny because reciprocate as a philosophy is what I align with, but also it was funny how, because my email for years, like was Cipri Catalina. Yeah. And then I'm writing it down and I'm like, reciprocate sounds like reciprocate. And then I started thinking about like, okay, like what does reciprocate mean? And then it was like to feel and give for others in the same way that I do for myself. I'm like, yes.
Love.
And so it was just like a moment of where I was like, wow, like things are coming together. There's synergy between like what I want to give and who I am as a person. And because I think that's important too, where, I grew up with this belief that you're two people, the person you are at work and the person you are at home. Yeah. And like, as a social worker, I recognize like, that's not true, like for me, exactly, in my experience, like I wasn't able to compartmentalize that, like who I showed up as, with my first like participant was who I am. And it made me realize it's like, okay, like how can I protect myself. And I like that you mentioned boundaries, but like I grew up like specifically in my Colombian culture, like boundaries was seen as like selfish because like todo tiene que ser sacrificios, like everything is a sacrifice, everything is like, and that's how you're a good person. Like that's how what I grew up hearing.
Right.
And like that was something that was hard for me because then when like I wanted to say no to something, it's like, oh, Satanas, like literally like these were things that I grew up hearing.
It's also very Catholic, and we both went to Catholic school. Like being, at least for the way that I engaged in the Catholic religion through going to Catholic school, through going to a Catholic university, and just the way that my family raised me, even though they're not super religious, it was like the sacrifice is the way to go. It's like, do unto others as you want done to you, the whole golden rule thing. And it's we're constantly asked to live in the image of Jesus, and Jesus sacrificed his life for our sins and so on and so forth. And then generations on, it's like, well, all we know how to do, and the way that you're going to get to heaven, or the way that you're going to be a good person for your community, is to literally just sacrifice your whole self. Like I remember being in high school and learning about martyrs and saints who like ate this one can of beans for 3 months because they wanted to educate all these kids who weren't allowed to be educated in X, Y, and Z country. And it's like, oh yes, like that's the kind of person that you need to be. And then not everybody has that intense kind of faith to feel replenished when they're giving so much of themselves out into the world. And we have to ask ourselves, you know, what is that mode for us to be able to do that, if that mode that we were necessarily passed down or taught isn't the one that works for us?
Right. And, you know, it's interesting because I think, you know, for some people, like that motivates them. But then for others, I'm thinking, right, like how then observing yourself comes in, right? Because if you feel totally empowered, absolutely, like I'm rooting for you. But if it's not, like, I think this is where I definitely recommend like exploring what does, like, what are you literally like, our senses teach us so much. Everyone has different connections to their senses, and even just observing that and seeing like what really gives me peace, what things, you know, that not necessarily material, but smells, visual things, sounds make you feel your best self so that you can. Really interesting for me because like I grew up going to church several times a week, like even through college. And during college, I went to Loyola, so it was a Jesuit school. And it was interesting. I was walking to a dining hall one day. Like I remember I was rushing. I hadn't eaten. I was taking like 6 classes. I was literally like, I'm so hungry. And I was like running. And this girl stops me. She's like, oh, we're going to do solidarity. Like, would you be down to wear a hijab for a day? I didn't know anything about Islam, nothing. And she was like, would you like to do it? I'm like, of course. So it was the next day. So I put on the hijab, but uncomfortable because I didn't know anything about the realities of why people wear hijab or what it means or anything. I'm like, that felt so like fake to me. Like, to put something on just so I could be like, oh, I'm in solidarity. But I'm like, what does solidarity mean? Is this what the community wants? Is this helping the community? Right. You know? And so then literally that day, I went to my counselor and I was like, do you have Arabic and Islam classes here? And they were like, yeah. So I enrolled and I ended up being like a major. Yeah. But the thing was that opened up my mind so much to really just exploring what I actually believe. Because I obviously have faith, but what does it mean to have faith in my body, in my community? And it was really fascinating how through this interfaith dialogue and through these courses, I was able to learn so much about myself, which was ended up leading me moving to Palestine after graduation. And what was really interesting there is how that little, like I found that girl on Instagram a few, like a year ago actually. And I was like, yeah, thank you so much. You know, like you really opened up my mind and my heart in all these different ways. And all this healing work for me of having ways to really explore and observe myself. And, you know, I recommend that, you know, people feel comfortable because I think that was another limiting belief that I had growing up where it was like, you have to accept what you have and like just be grateful because you have a lot. And with just accepting, then it's confusion because you're like grateful, but why do I have these questions or these thoughts? And so going outside of myself and exploring, I was able to say, okay, well, in fact, the reason why I was having these doubts because actually I don't believe in it framed this way. I believe in it framed another way. And that's where this language comes in too, where being able to express myself in different languages and reading in different languages, talking to different communities and seeing how they speak about things and talk about everyday things just felt really natural to me and very different from, you know, like now, like we were talking about how, you know, I was celebrating Eid last week and, you know, how I married into Moroccan family and how all these, my everyday cultures have now adapted, like I have chosen to adapt them in a way because this culture has felt really compatible to the ways that I've wanted to live, but maybe weren't available to me or maybe were contrary to what my peers in New York were doing.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's interesting, this journey, like everything has just, like, part of me wants to say everything just happened, but no, I think this is when we allow ourselves to tap into different energies and just express ourselves, like then we become receptive to these different things that are meant for us, but maybe we were like not allowing. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I mean, I think expression, as someone who is a very expressive person, and I express myself verbally more than anything else. I have my artistic times where, you know, I may do things here and there. I also express myself a lot through food. I would say that those are my two major modes of expression is verbalizing and articulating myself, but also through food. Like food is my love language. But besides the point, in being able to express yourself, you are able to essentially show up and meet yourself in that moment in time, because whether it's you're being able to see yourself through your art or through your cooking or through your movement in dance or working out or whatever it may be, and you're it's like you're meeting yourself, not necessarily for the first time, but you're showing up for yourself with yourself, and being able to do that over and over again allows you to further connect and feel comfortable in asking those questions of what feels right and what doesn't, of how you express yourself, or the kinds of spaces that you put yourself in that maybe ask you not to express yourself in a particular way, and being able to evaluate whether or not that is the kind of space or route that you want to take. Because when you are handed down, this is how you need to express yourself and this is how you need to kind of live your life, there is no room for you. You are just kind of moving with the emotions, and moving with the emotions and not questioning and connecting with your true self and your energy and what is inside of you. And like you said, scanning your body and reading your body and being in tune with your senses and yourself, to understand what you are truly seeking is when you are most furthest taken away from yourself and you're kind of just a floating being, and all about being human. When we're taken away of all of these like titles and I'm a part of this community and that community, at the end of the day we're all human. Our duty as a human and as a part of creation is to live and to thrive on, you know, this plane as a physical being at this point in time. And you know, what are you doing to really live? If you're living based on the aspects and puzzle pieces that were handed down to you from somebody else, then it's not really yours. And it comes back to the point that you made of making things personal. Like you need to create your own personal space, your own personal way of expression that feels true and real to you. Like back to your story of like how you being in Brussels gave you kind of like a sense of peace. Like your energy and your spirit was like, wow, like maybe this is where I belong. And, you know, again, to what you've said, like, it doesn't have to be a place. It could be a person. It could be a way of expression. It's what is bringing you that sense of calmness within yourself? Because the more that you take yourself away from those kinds of things, it creates more tension, and it creates this pressure within you that I like to kind of explain it as there's going to be a point where you explode. And when you explode, then you're just a bunch of different pieces, and you don't know how to pull yourself back together, because there is no center, there is no core that you can go back to and say like, well, this is who I was at my foundation, and now I can just rebuild on top of that.
Yeah, and that is a really good point. It goes back to people thinking that a lot, and I've seen this, and even in my own life, where like working on yourself, and people think is like the opposite of caring for your community, where in fact, like the more boundaries you have for yourself, the more you understand helpful for you, then you can show up for your community or communities in a way that's best. If we all understand each other, then we're able to articulate our needs, so that then when we think, we know exactly what we need, so it's helpful. Because that's where in social work, I recognize that if I was giving an assessment to someone, options of what they could choose from, but maybe they didn't need any of those 10 options. There was something else. And this is where I was like, okay, like this is where there's a limitation here. Like, how can we identify with you what you really need? Because that was manifesting in your need to need work. Like there were just so many things where it wasn't always so obvious. And so that's why I really recommend that. And something too is that sometimes even the word energy feels really far for people.
Yeah.
And so that's where recently, so from the beginning of this year, I've been teaching a class of healing with color, because I recognized that color is something that, everyone has experienced color in some way. And even that where, okay, so it's working through different colors, through different theories. So I work through the traditional Chinese medicine or chakra system or color philosophy. I've also been studying art therapy. So like different philosophies, and then applying that to your personal application. And that it's at the end of the day, then that's successful. Like whatever name you call it, if it's helping you manage the way you're feeling. And it's cool to do this in community, because then people are like, oh my goodness, this is why, every time I was down, I was going for like a walk and I would just look at the sky. Like people start recognizing these connections in their life. But it's also really cool personally to recognize, maybe this is why, like when you mentioned food, like, yes, I would love to cook together even virtually, because that's my love language too, for sure. But, like what I think is super cool is how people would say, you know what, I've been really attached to this herb for years. And I'm like, well, actually, that is part of red energy. And then they're like, oh my goodness, like, yes, I was actually deficient in that, like recognizing that things about yourself. And I think that is so cool. And able to read that and to embody, like this whole time, my body's been supporting me either by telling me what I need or just what I'm doing great. And also I've seen that in community, because I recognize Reciprocate has come out of like learning the philosophies and studied, has come out of what has helped me, but that doesn't mean that then I'm giving a prescription, right? Of like, oh, this is what, no, like it's totally, and that's what I'm saying, like it's customized, it's personalized, but it's also adaptable. So when I started doing sessions, so different things of like people telling me where they're at, and then we'd create this plan of, okay, this is where you are, this is where you want to be, these like creative things to see what aligns for you. But now, besides the color, healing with color, it's what really exciting is adapting it to people have actually wanted mentorship. So what that means is to really understand, it's like, okay, you, for example, you have these talents, you created a podcast, right? And so you had a clear direction, right? But there's people that they're like, I have these talents, and I want a job and I want to work for myself, but I don't know. So it's really embodying like, okay, what do you feel? What do you enjoy? And working through like co-designing all these things so that they can create a business or a creative project, whatever feels comfortable for you term wise, because business might sound like, but working through that and getting you to a place where then you're able to work. Like, I have a few examples of communities that I've been working with this year that have just given me so much peace, because like people saying to me, I like this one girl who I hold so dearly, told me like, oh, well, I medical cannabis saved her life. And through that, like, art came up too. And then now, like, she just launched this business putting together art and cannabis and showing people, like, destigmatizing that idea of, what, like, how cannabis can help your body and these things. So like that was just so powerful.
It's
for her
awesome.
to be like, okay, like I have these things. And then like someone else saying like, okay, this saved my life, like when I was at my worst, and realizing that this oil, even though it's a physical thing, able to actually be the thing that led, and creating a business centered around that, like centering, like overcoming wounds and ritualizing self-love through our scars. And it's been such a healing thing, I think, actually, like reciprocally to of like how your story matters. And it's not selfish to create a business based on what has helped you. It's that then it becomes adaptable and helpful, so that people see where the community comes in. But it's just talking about expression and how these things come together. Find comfort in expressing themselves in any way that feels healthy for them.
Mm-hmm. And like letting people know, which I'm sure that you do this, like it takes time, especially if you are not an expressive person, or you may have been traumatized into not expressing yourself at all, that being able to find the tools and the space to express yourself in the first place can be very difficult. But if you are fully committed to yourself and being able to be committed to the love that you have for yourself, in time you will figure out how to express. Because I know even for me, I've always been this person who has had this angst of wanting to create something for my community that ties into who I am and my talents, very much to a lot of the people that you work with in the Reciprocate community. And it took a lot of time for me to really come down and commit to the idea of creating a podcast. And I've toyed with so many different ideas of physical spaces and manifesting this, that, and the third, or I need to have X, Y, and Z in order to be able to fully like put my gifts and my talents that are out there. And it wasn't until a friend approached me who's a teacher and was like, well, why don't you consider it a podcast? And I was like, I never thought of it that way. And like what you said, like working with the people that you do via Reciprocate, it's a mutual healing. It's a mutual place that you and, this person or these people that you're working with arrive to together. Like every episode that I do, I'm constantly learning from the first one that I recorded back in November to this one. Like, I'm sure weeks from now, I'm going to be like, this conversation that I had with Kat is like still running through my head, and I'm learning so much. And, it's allowed me to see things differently. And I love that we're able to create these spaces and to encourage people to do this kind of stuff, whether it's, like creating a business through the things that have always been aligned in our lives, or finding ways to express ourselves based on these kind of like symbols and moments of our lives that have kind of all come together, very much to your story or even to my story, or something as, sharing your story on a podcast, whatever it may be, being able to create these spaces that allow us to find this part of ourselves to really just make home out of it and create this kind of peace within ourselves, but also this like fire to really put ourselves out into the world and connect with those that are around us while still being able to maintain this like strong sense of self. I just think that the work that you're doing is beautiful, and the whole backstory is it's bomb. Like I love it. I'm not surprised that you're out here doing this, which I think just excites me and warms my heart even more, because you never lost your touch. And I think that like, that's amazing that you still very much have that energy, have that fire, have that touch, or just have that characteristic about you that has really grown and flourished in so many different kinds of ways. You know, you went from being this like one flower to this whole international garden, which is awesome. Like there's literally no other way to describe that. And I love that you're providing a sense of beauty to so many different kinds of people. And that's just always who you have been. You've been this beautiful person, and I'm so happy so many other people get to engage in that beauty as well.
Thank you. National Garden? What? Like, I'm like, wow. Thank you. But, you know, something too, and like I also want to validate that your choice is really powerful. And something that I really appreciate about your platform, and something that I think is an overlap with Reciprocate, is, so to give you context, is that people finish their session, I often create a healing guidebook for them, which is one part what we did, home practices. So we spoke about one thing. This is a way for you to continue, because I don't believe that people should have to continue with me. You might want to do one session, or you might want to do a bunch, but whatever you want to do, that's great. But I think this journal, this guidebook, for you to continue. And I think that archiving is self-love. I went back and listened to a bunch of your podcasts. I'm like, this is so cool. I'm so happy that this wasn't just live, because then I would have missed it. And not just for me, but for other people too, right?
Yeah.
And so that's an archive that you have now, right? Of the story of yourself, because I'm sure too, if we're always learning and evolving, who you were and someone hosting this is different from now. And I think being able to have this, but I think a lot of times journaling has felt like, but finding a way to archive, if it's through song, through voice notes. Like I was talking to my brother the other day, and I was like, moon manifesting, and I was like, okay, like write your intentions. He's like, oh, actually, like I do write my goals in my phone notes. And I'm like, that's fantastic. Like, yeah. And so maybe you don't want to sit down and have a pretty journal. Maybe you want to just talk into your phone or send voice notes to yourself, you know?
Yeah.
But as a way for you to have this to look back to, and your experiences, like even the smallest things. And that's why I think, like, okay, if you love to cook, write these recipes down.
Yeah, speaking to your archives, and I think it's just because of how I've been raised, the importance of your personal like legacy and history. My like grandmother, I love her to death, and you know, true Italian American, had to let me know. Yeah, the nonna, like she had to let me know like the history of our family. And I know it in depth. And the last time that I was home, I made copies of a bunch of like pictures and passports and social security cards from when my family first came to the United States. And I'm trying to create a book to pass down to my daughter, to be able to say like, this is where you came from. Like, this is only a smidgen of all of the people that you have come from, because we're so mixed and we have so many different, you know, directions that our blood goes in. But this is one that I know and that I can give you and that we can talk about. And, you know, even encouraging my partner to write down our recipes and how we altered them, and, you know, what worked, what hasn't. And we won't write it down until we've perfected it ourselves. And we've gotten it to a place where him and I feel like this is worth passing down or giving to a friend, or, you know, whatever it may be. But like you said, like it's the archive, the act of writing it down or recording it or whatever it may be. And then you're always able to come back to that, into that place, into that moment, into that experience that you're holding on to forever. Like it's something special. And, or it is a place of healing, or like a pinpoint that you're saving. So definitely write down your recipes. It's important, but the archiving is a big one for sure. But we're coming to the end of the episode, and I want to make sure, because I know that you've said so much, and I want to make sure that people know where to find you and Reciprocate, and to engage in your content, but to also for you to leave the audience with something that you feel is important for them to take away from your episode today.
If you'd like to learn more, we're mainly active on Instagram, and that's reciprocate.studio, which is also our website. And my email is Catalina at reciprocate.studio. But in terms of what I would like for you, is if possible for your feet to touch the ground and for your eyes to be closed. And I want to just, before I share, I would like for us to share 3 collective inhales through our nose and then exhale. So you can look at this as a prayer, as a poem, as an affirmation, as a manifestation, any word that aligns with you. And so you can repeat this as you'd like. Today, I encourage myself to be trusting of myself and others, loving to everyone around and in me, honest to the present state of my bodies, kind to what I see, talk to, or hear, and grateful for all the things I have received.
You are now listening to You Heard.